Hello friends, welcome back or welcome here. My name is Sarah and today's video is going to be my monthly reading wrap up for July. For those of you that are unfamiliar with my format for these videos, I record my reviews of the books I read as I read them and then compile them into this video at the very end of the month. So don't be surprised or alarmed if we suddenly cut to me in a completely different space and time. I have 8 different books to talk about with you today, so without further ado, let's dive in and I will check in with you at the end. Hello, good morning. We are starting off strong because I have 3 books to talk about now. In bed because I'm exhausted. These were the 3 books that I finished in my reading vlog, where I was finishing up my partially read books. So I'll just give a quick rundown now. So first is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. This is a speculative historical fiction that is set in England in the 1800s and is about magic. Magic in this world and time is primarily an academic and theoretical subject that is taken up by gentlemen, and one magician is a particularly gatekeepery guy, and his name is Mr. Norrell. He's also the only magician who can actively do magic. That is until Jonathan Strange comes onto the scene, who is a young, affable gentleman who is the foil. He is the absolute opposite of Mr. Norrell's rude, fussy, ungenerous tendencies. There is also a fairy kingdom that exists under the surface of this world that is ruled by the gentleman with the thistledown hair, or the Fey King, who is ridiculous, hilarious, and absolutely horrifying all at the same time. The magic system, the characters, and the general vibes are what drives this book. The plot itself isn't actually all that exciting, but the magic system is so unique and original and in keeping with the setting. Susanna Clarke marries together 2 very prominent ideas about English or British magic. One being the more traditional, rural, kind of folkloric ideas about magic being imbued and coming from the earth and from magical creatures, and the other is from more traditionally academic sources, so lots of spellcasting in mirrors in old libraries from dusty books by candlelight. Lots of dark academia vibes throughout, so personally I would recommend waiting to read this in the autumn and the winter time, or if you can't wait, to wait for at least a gloomy, rainy day to get the full effect. Secondly is Botanical Folk Tales of Britain and Ireland by Lisa Schneidel. It was so nice to be introduced to more regionally specific or older or just folk tales that I'd never heard of before, and lovely to just be able to dip in and out of this book. The tales are all really short, so you could read 1 or you could read 5 depending on how much time you had. And also one of my favourite things about it was at the beginning of every story there was like a little introduction which was either giving some overview to the plants and what they might have represented and why they were there, or it might be something regionally specific, just like a little bit of extra information, a little bit of context. And some of that was quite humorous, some of it was just really interesting to know about, and yeah, I really liked that aspect of it. And then thirdly, we have Spirit of Place by Susan Owens. This is a non-fiction book about how artists and writers have represented and interpreted British landscape from early medieval until present day. It is jam-packed with information, plates, musings, very thoughtfully curated, and her tone is really engaging and humorous at times, which is so refreshing to find in a non-fiction author and book. It is potentially quite a niche read, however, if you are interested in landscape drawing, poetry, paintings, etc., then you might really enjoy this. Right, I need a brew now after all that talking. Hello! So the next book that I have to talk about is Prisoner of Heaven by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, and this is the 3rd book in the Cemetery of Forgotten Books series, the first of which is The Shadow of the Wind. Now in terms of order of reading, You can read them in any order that you choose. This is technically the third one in the series, and it follows the story of one of the characters from The Shadow of the Wind, whose name is Feramin. And so this is kind of his story. I really enjoy Zafon's writing. I feel like it's really easy to get engaged with. It's very funny a lot of the time, and Feramin especially is just one of those incredible characters that you just absolutely instantly fall in love with. As with all of the other books by this author that I've read, they were really enjoyable and really quick reads for me. I really like the mix of humour that comes with the very dark aspects of the book. It is set in Barcelona around the Semper and Sons bookshop, which we find out about in the first book, Shadow of the Wind, and the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, which is this kind of labyrinthine, secretive book storage library place where forgotten books go, and people can put copies of books that would like otherwise be burnt or destroyed in there, hence the name Cemetery of Forgotten Books. I enjoyed this. I thought it was good. I didn't think it was great, but in terms of like the actual plot and getting to know the characters more, it was just sort of it was good. It was enjoyable. I read it really quickly. Nothing will ever come close to the first book for me. The second book, which was Angel's Game, was also good but incredibly confusing, and it references both of those books, but I think personally I would have preferred to have read this before Angel's Game. Nevertheless, really enjoyed it, and I will be picking up the fourth installment to this series just because I'm so invested in the characters now. I'm so invested in this world, this storyline, and I really enjoy Carlos Ruiz Zafon's writing style. I really enjoy the speed of it. They're very quickly paced books, and as I say, I just really like the characters and the drama. As with all the other two books in the series, there are a couple of content warnings, one of which would be war and the other would be kind of torture or police brutality. But the things that are mentioned are always to progress the plot or to progress your relationship with the character. It's not just done for the sake of it. It kind of follows the same things which I loved about the other two books, which is like it's a little bit cheesy at times. The mystery of it is not too high stakes. I think it's a fun series and I enjoyed it. Good morning. The book I'm talking about today is The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the first book in a historical fantasy trilogy, Daevabad trilogy I believe it's called, and it's set in 18th century Middle East. We start out in Cairo following Nahri, who is living as a con artist when we first meet her. She doesn't initially believe in magic, but when she accidentally conjures up a djinn, that very quickly changes, and she finds herself on the way to the magical city of Daevabad. Here we begin to learn about her own magical heritage, as well as a tumultuous and bloody past between the tribes that exist in the City of Brass, also known as Daevabad, as well as their connection to the human world and religion. Specifically, Islam is centered here. All of the characters in this book are fairly complex. They all have attributes that are redeeming and endearing and make you want to root for them. But similarly, they all have moments in the book which are concerning or deeply unsettling and problematic. However, for me, it was the political system that kept me interested in the book, more so than the characters and a lot more so than the plot, which for me felt really strangely paced. This book was very slow to actually take off, I felt, and I found that quite frustrating. However, the ending was absolutely insane and very intriguing, and so despite all of the flaws that I know I just mentioned, I think I'm going to have to pick up the second book because I've now spent a considerable amount of time with these characters and I'm very invested in the world and in the characters, and I want to know what happens next. So yeah, I enjoyed this. I wasn't as bowled over and amazed by it as I hoped I would be, but I have high hopes for the second one. Now that we've established the world, I feel like the pacing might be a little bit more to my liking. The second book that I have to very quickly talk about, because there isn't loads to say, is The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. This is somewhere between a graphic novel and a comic. Despite looking quite long, It's actually short. The majority of the stuff in here is beautiful illustrations, but it really is a hug in the book about kind of finding your place in the world. I would recommend this for all ages. I really think it's applicable to wherever you are in your life. But there's a quote on the back by Bear Grylls that I think summarises the heart of the book, which is, "Love, friendship and kindness. This book speaks a universal language." It doesn't really have a story to it, doesn't really have fleshed out characters or anything. It's very much predominantly illustrative pages that are peppered with little insightful comments and quotes, and it's just something that I like to pick up if I'm feeling a bit down. And so I read this morning and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I know I will be picking it up again. The next book is Enchantment by Catherine May. This is a non-fiction book full of personal anecdotes, experience and wisdom, and it's all about reconnecting to the natural world, to your inner child, and to the sense of wonder or enchantment within the complexity of life. In its essence and at its core, it is really about mindfulness, in that it's about what we can deliberately turn our attentions to and what we can gain from that. It's written post-pandemic, and it talks a lot about anxiety and overcoming things that are out of our control, as well as isolation. And it is done so beautifully. I felt really, really comforted and understood by this book. I listened to it in its audio form, and I really, really liked it in that format because it just felt like there was a really calming and wise friend that was telling me ideas and things that they'd experienced. It was just full of gentle inspiration and motivation, and I absolutely loved it. One of the blurbs describes it as a balm, and I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. It just felt really healing and restorative, and I absolutely loved it, and I can definitely see myself rereading it. So I would definitely recommend Enchantment by Catherine May. The last book that I read in July was Book of Night by Holly Black, and this is a contemporary urban fantasy novel. In this world, the magic system revolves around shadows. Shadows can be tethered, moved, sewn to other people, or stolen. They can also be manipulated by their owners and give the people that they belong to a lot of power. But similarly, they can also become quite self-actualized and self-conscious if made powerful enough. They are fed and given power by humans' pain, guilt, suffering, shame, etc., all bad things, as well as being fed by human blood. Our protagonist is Charlie Hall, who is a con artist and bartender who's currently trying to distance herself from her troubled past. But inevitably, she gets wrapped up in another dangerous magic-related job when a violent incident occurs at the bar that she works in, revolving around a highly prized book, the Book of Night, which is missing and holds some sort of highly sought-after information and mysterious knowledge. The book then transitions into more of like a murder mystery-esque style as she seeks to discover what's going on. The first half or so of this book was actually quite slow. It was not the page turner that I was hoping it would be, and although the concept of shadow magic is really unique and really cool, quite original, the way that it was explained was strangely convoluted or just hard to understand, even though what was actually being told to us was relatively simple. And the world building itself was also lacking a little bit for me, as were the characters. They were all quite bland, they all fell a little bit flat. I didn't really love or hate any of them, which is unfortunate because the story itself has really great potential. But I will say that the ending was intriguing and a little bit unexpected, but overall I did find book slightly underwhelming. Also, as a personal preference, there were terms that Holly Black used in this book that were just a little bit weird and very much trendy kind of vibes. Things like just calling eyeliner on point or using the term cottagecore just like did not fit with the vibe of the book at all, and I think in like 10 years time it's going to make it sound really outdated, but that is definitely just a personal preference. Well, that's it. You've made it to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed spending time with me today. And if you would like to, let me know what you are reading and enjoying in the comments below. Take care, and I will see you very soon with another one.